I think we can give it a go in this panel. I'm just double checking if that's okay from the organization side. But I think we can, and I think we should. So can just the panelists just raise their thumbs to see if they are they're hearing me well? That is wonderful. Welcome everyone here at this panel session for the Amsterdam FinTech Week 2020 on innovation and policy. We have a great lineup here with 4 speakers, and I'm going to moderate this hour with you guys. So before I will introduce, or the people will introduce themselves on this panel, I will shortly say who I am. My name is Jeroen. I am the host of the Leaders in Finance podcast, and I'm a former fintech entrepreneur as well as a banker. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to lead you through this hour. Let's start with the introduction of the people on the panel. So given 3 out of the 4 are based in the Netherlands, I would like to start with our Danish panelists. So Anette Printz Nielsen, she's a senior associate tech and fintech at Bird & Bird. Could you please introduce yourself, as well as maybe add one small fun fact to your introduction? That would be great if you could. And welcome.
Thank you, Jeroen. Yeah, so I'm Anette. I'm placed in Copenhagen. I'm a lawyer. I'm heading the financial services group here in Denmark. Working a lot with from Bird & Bird, an international law firm with offices in most of Europe, APAC, and Australia. So I deal with mostly the payment sector, but a broad range of fintech aspects, advising a large client, but also working closely with fintech startups. Yeah, and a fun fact. Yesterday, actually, I was just moving a piece of wood in my garden, and I almost got bitten by a snake, which was a bit unusual, but apparently that was the home of a snake. I don't think, at least last night, I didn't consider it quite fun, but my kids sure did. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you for your introduction. That's a very recent fun fact. I'm not so sure if that was that fun for you, but yeah, no, I'm happy you're here on the panel. So maybe we can continue with you, Tijmen. You are the head of the Department Supervision at the Dutch Central Bank. I don't see you anymore, but I think you're still on the panel, right?
I am. Yeah. So unfortunately, actually, I can hear you, but not for Anette for some reason. Do you hear me?
We hear you very well.
Yes.
You are hearing me?
Absolutely.
Okay. I switched off my video. I'll turn it. Yeah, I'll try to turn my video back on, but I believe I have a bandwidth problem maybe. So at least when I'm speaking, it's maybe for the best. Yes, I'm Tijmen Daniels. I'm working for the Dutch Central Bank. I don't think the institution I work for needs a lot of introduction. It has been a pillar of the Dutch financial system since 1814. I joined the bank about 10 years ago. I worked in financial stability for quite a number of years. You may recall that about 10 years ago we were in a financial crisis, and we call it the previous crisis here at the bank. Nowadays, we are of course, in a new interesting situation at the moment. I moved from financial stability to payment supervision about 3 years ago, and for instance, I know some of you from that role, heading the Department of Payments Institutions Supervisors. So that's me.
sure we're treating everyone equally. Do you also add a fun factor?
Oh, a fun fact. I don't know. Well, I switched off the camera, but you could see my office, which is very rare because usually there are no cameras allowed, and I'm here for the first time since a long time. So maybe that's a fact. I don't know if it's fun given the situation, but at least it's interesting.
Somewhat. You're setting the together with the snake. We're setting the scene here. So let's move on to introduce Edwin van Bommel. He's the CIO, and that means in this case the Chief Innovation Officer at ABN Amro. Edwin, could you please introduce yourself as well as maybe add your fun fact?
Yeah, so I'm Edwin van Bommel, responsible for innovation within ABN AMRO. We actually do two things. We focus, first of all, a lot of our efforts on really launching new products and services along the lines of sustainability, digital assets, and platformication. And on the other hand, I'm also being quite responsible for artificial intelligence and distributed ledger, which is a lot of fun. I'm doing it now for 2 years. Before that, I was actually the CEO of Amelia, living then in New York. And Amelia was or is artificial intelligence platform, and before that, I actually was a partner at McKinsey and one of the founding partners of Digital McKinsey. Maybe the fun fact is that normally I do this when I'm working from home out of my office, but technically that was not possible. So I'm actually sitting in my daughter's bedroom right now. So that's it.
For joining. Last but not least, Hessel Kuik, the CEO and founder of Bizcuit. Welcome, Hessel, and maybe you can also introduce yourself as well as add the fun fact.
Yeah, Jeroen, thank you. Indeed, Hessel Kuik, CEO and founder of Bizcuit, CEO also of the broader Bizcuit group. We offer 3 kinds of solutions to the market. One is an accounting solution. I did not found that because it was around since 1983 already. I was 3 back then. But I came into the company in 2015 as a CEO and completed the management buyout. So it's accounting, cloud ERP, as well as a payments solution, and that's the Bizcuit platform. We are a licensed payment institution. We have a PSD2 license since November last year, both for account information services and payment initiation services. And with our platform, we offer an app for SME businesses and freelancers, in which they can manage their whole business in one app, receive invoices, do their banking, do their payments. And also to partners, we offer the possibility to integrate banks via our platform to get bank transactions and also to facilitate payments. I'm also the chairman of the PSD2 Software Industry Group, an industry group that has almost all of the new entrants under PSD2 services 7 and 8 as members. And in that capacity, I'm talking to banks as well as regulators on behalf of the sector. Finally, the fun fact, well, we have all been working from home, but we're actually about to become an officeless company soon because we canceled out on our rent on the office in Veenendaal, where we are located. We are planning to move to Utrecht, but due to Corona, the market is actually developing in our benefit. So we have been waiting for the right deal, but we don't have a deal yet, and we have 1 month still to go. So if anyone knows office space in Utrecht, then I'm certainly interested.
Thank you for the introduction, and it was very much on purpose to have you last introducing yourself because I was pretty certain you would mention PSD2, which is also one of the 3 topics we try to cover today under the broader umbrella of innovation and policy. So that's the Payment Services Directive 1. Secondly, crypto asset regulation and maybe some crypto technology questions around that topic. And then thirdly, we want to discuss some things around big tech and developments there. So let's dive into that first topic. But before I do, I want to say that Anna Hakvoort, a partner at FG Lawyers, was also planning on joining this session, but unfortunately she had to call in ill. So that is sad, but she
Yeah, sure. So PSD2, so it's been implemented all over or in all member states. That's becoming a bit ago. So that hasn't been without difficulties. I think most regulators found it difficult and still find it's difficult because there are some uncertainties in PSD2, but for sure it's been implemented. I think some of the sort of outstanding issues or the tricky issues that both regulators and companies subject to PSD2 is struggling with is the quality of APIs. So under PSD2, payment institutions were sort of forced to open up and allow what we call third-party providers to access data and to communicate via APIs with the banks. So, but it's been difficult for the banks or the payment institutions to sort of build the necessary tech for this to happen. And the TPPs are in general complaining about the qualities. They don't get the data they want. They don't get sort of the stability they want. The EBA has addressed this at least once, I think several times, also local regulators. And I don't know all over Europe, but at least in Denmark. So if the bank succeeds in providing high quality API, they can rely on this fallback exemption. But at least in Denmark, it's not, no one has, the Danish FSA haven't approved any yet, saying that none of the sort of APIs have been actually good enough for now, at least. So that's one thing. Another thing is strong customer authentication, the SCA requirements. So that's not been fully implemented, or at least companies are not fully compliant with that yet. So the deadline has been pushed on a European level until end of December this year. Actually, a few regulators have extended that further, being the Danish and the UK regulators. But that's been a struggle, and I think that still is a struggle for companies sort of to live up to that. I think another challenge, at least, has been for regulators and also for companies being subject to PSD2 is sort of the regulation of the new players, so the TPPs, which are not banks or payment institutions, but are, in many cases at least, smaller tech companies suddenly becoming subject to license requirements and regulation, which has been difficult and still is difficult for those companies, but also for the regulators, because that's sort of different players in that field. And the fourth thing I will mention is, which is also a bit uncertain, is sort of the interplay between PSD2 and GDPR and the European Data Protection Board just issued for consultation some guidelines on this, because there is to some extent an overlap and some uncertainties on that field. But we got some guidelines, and so these are also being discussed. So that's just a few of the outstanding issues and the most sort of recent discussions on PSD2.
Thank you. That makes sense. Tijmen, from a regulatory perspective, are there things to add from your side? Are there potential concerns you guys are mainly focusing on, or other things you'd like to add?
Sure. So I'm having a very bad audio connection actually. So if you cannot hear me, please give the thumbs down. I'll try. I'll see what I can do. But maybe picking up on the fourth point that Anette just mentioned, I think one of the key things that we are looking at now at the moment is, what will be the uptake of the new PSD2 services. We have actually seen quite a lot of entrants in the Dutch market over the last year, about 20 new players, and I expect maybe this year we would end up with similar figures, maybe a little bit lower. And then the question is, well, what are these firms going to do? I know that Hessel has a very nice solution, obviously, that he is offering to the market. But if you look at, so that is the business side, but if you look at the consumer side, then the research that we have done in this field shows that that people are still quite reluctant. It is not really obvious to them in some cases what will be the added value of the new services. So and I'm sure that is going to change. When products are offered that make sense from the consumer side, then probably people will start going for it. But for now, really in the Netherlands, the privacy debate is really dominating, I believe. So I think that is really apart from the technical things that Anette mentioned, which I all recognize. I think this is also really a key factor. So how do we build trust? How do we build added value in this sector?
Just Tijmen, maybe one question on the fact you mentioned there are 20 new players. There's another 10, 20 other players maybe coming in this year. So there is a big difference between what they're aiming for.
Yeah, so they are doing different things, and I think one key observation, and it is maybe not surprising, but maybe not what everyone expected 2 years ago, is that we see a lot of movement in the business-to-business solutions. So, for instance, accounting software, that's really a proposition that makes a lot of sense to firms, probably. And then you have firms aiming at consumers, for instance, what we call Dutch huishoudboekjes, so giving an overview of your finances, also some price comparison services. I think there the uptake is really, well, do people trust to give their data to these types of parties? There's of course a lot of regulation in place to protect them. I want to emphasize that. But I think there is still the reluctance, and I think that the things that maybe people a couple of years were concerned about. So you'll have to hand over all your data to do a mortgage application to a third party. I think that we see so far relatively little movement in that sphere. So. Yeah, so the most of the, I think the movement is actually in the business to business, with some consumer focused firms, and then of course the traditional payments firms that try to make use of the new payments initiation as an alternative to solutions that have been out there for years.
Thanks for sharing. So it's also a very beautiful bridge to Hessel. I mean, Hessel, with Bizcuit, you're one of the companies that are actually making use of PSD2. You acquired the license already quite a while ago. Can you take us through what you guys have done with the license and what are potential challenges as well as other opportunities you see with leveraging PSD2?
Yes, sure. Well, we indeed have a business-to-business proposition. We obtained our license in November last year, but the process to obtain that license already started in 2016. So we've actually done quite a lot. I think my main message is that getting that license is not something to be underestimated. I guess especially not if you also want to go for the payment initiation part. I recognize a lot of the challenges that were mentioned by Anette and also by Tijmen. If you are in this market, you will see that the PSD2 APIs are challenging. They are not standardized, and that is something I hear a lot of people talk about if you discuss the challenges of PSD2. But actually, that is by far not the most complex part and the most work, because especially if you have a company that does not come from the financial services industry, there is the challenges to get the right mindset, the compliance mindset, the organization with second and third line of defense, with processes, with policies, with all of that documented, with all the measures in place around security, around privacy. That is actually a lot of work, and you have to do that in a very structured way, thinking very carefully about your risks and what you need to do to address those risks. So yeah, that has in fact taken us more or less 3 years. It's not only the technology, it's also the platform and the organization and the processes. If you look at where we are with PSD2 in general, 1 year after the sort of the go live of the technical standards, which are not really technical, they're pretty technology agnostic, and they're also not really standards because the APIs are not standardized. But at least the banks had to comply since September last year. We see that there are indeed challenges with the data that we're getting. One of the use cases that Tijmen already mentioned is around accounting. Well, accounting systems require certain fields in the data that you don't see in your banking app, but that you can get if you download the data. We need that data also in the PSD2 APIs. Another question is around which users should have access to the data. Is it only the person that is in the Chamber of Commerce, or can it also work with a power of attorney? Well, there are many situations where it's not entirely clear who should have access. And also we see challenges around the user experience. So it starts with the API, you connect to the bank from a technical perspective, but also as a user, you need to confirm your consent to provide access to your account in the bank environment. So you also get a couple of screens that are provided by the bank. And the user experience around that is, in general, it is not very good. And we are very happy with the Q&A and the guidelines that were published by the DNB and also the EBA that provide, in our opinion, clear guidance on how a frictionless customer journey should look like. But not all banks, or actually none of the banks, do, in our opinion, fully comply to those guidelines. So yes, everything works. We are connected to all the Dutch banks, but there's still a lot to improve.
Well, you mentioned banks, so that's a good one for Edwin. Maybe Edwin, you can also shed some light on how you see that banks have dealt with the new regulation, and also maybe do the same thing, which is focus on what are the challenges and opportunities you see both for your bank or maybe more general in banks everywhere.
Yeah, also for us, right, it's already been quite a journey. I think if I remember correctly, we were, from the 3 big banks in Holland, at least the first one to open up our developer portal. We currently have somewhere around 3,500 people actually logged in on that portal and have rights and can play with the sandbox and these type of things. So I think there's already been progress. I also recognize that not everything yet is perfect, and we try also to be also in dialogue with basically the people now on our platform to make improvements on that. I think if I take a step back, we have sort of what we legally are required to do. In parallel, we also are experimenting actually with other types of APIs, also to help others without even we are obliged to do that. So, for instance, to help merchants, etc. Through Corona, we published, for instance, the Tiki checkout API, so that more people actually could go digital much quicker. Also, that has resonated quite well. And if I then really take a full step back, right there, I recognize some of the challenges which also were mentioned by Hessel, so power of attorney, etc. Those are also things we're still struggling with, and I think it's just good to have the dialogue there to see how we all can solve these things, because I think there's more than just one group who has some of these challenges. On the other hand, if I also take a look at what's now really happening and what is now really changing, it's overall still quite slow. And that has also to do a bit with the uptake, etc. We see, for instance, with Grip, right, our Grip application, right, which is actually created with Tink, which also now is open. We actually see people there using also the PSD2 connections. Moreover, we actually also see people are banking at some of the other banks using the app. But overall, if you look in general at the developments, I think people still need to get used to it. I still think also, right, we need to get the whole system a bit better up and running. But in my mind, we should also do that very much in collaboration, because I see where we actually have the collaboration, no matter if it's with Tink or with some of the other parties which we collaborate, that's actually when we make the most mileage.
From an opportunity perspective, are there other things where you see opportunities for your bank, for example?
Yeah, well, for sure, right. Grip is, for instance, one of them where we actually right now can integrate also your bank data from all the other banks and give you a full overview of your spend. We now recently with Supervision, we actually added also flagging where you actually have subscriptions, and to potentially give you advice on those subscriptions. So we actually see we can actually also build on PSD2 for some new business opportunities. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
To open up that question broader, do you guys see other great examples in the market, with or without names, but things that, you know, also Hessel's example is great, of course, but maybe also other examples. Hessel, you're also chairing, so you see a lot chairing this interest group. Do you see other great examples of people leveraging PSD, or maybe in Denmark or the central bank? Do you see other great examples? And I just start with anyone that goes first.
Well, yeah, in the Dutch market, we see a lot of great examples. The obvious one are accounting solutions that connect either under their own license or via a provider like Bizcuit in between. That adds a lot of value for the businesses and also for their accountants to improve. We have an app that rounds up amounts that you pay, and then you save it and you can use it for investment. And it's a very nice solution, and it's much more efficient with PSD2. There's also an app that does something similar as what Edwin mentioned around managing subscriptions, which I think is a very nice use case. Yeah, so overall, interesting developments, and there's much more coming up. I think not everything is visible yet. There are quite a few companies also with licenses that are not live with their solutions yet, so you don't see everything yet. I also surely want to respond on the comment of Edwin. The uptake is maybe not there yet in terms of volumes, but it's also a bit of a chicken and egg story, which links back to what I mentioned earlier about the user experience and the performance and the reliability of solutions, and the number of players and the adoption of those solutions. So yeah, but I'm sure we'll see a lot more in terms of solutions and also volumes and adoption.
Yeah, I'm convinced about that as well. I think this is the start. Everyone is getting used to a lot of stuff, right? Like you said, on the regulations, right? We have from the other side, okay, what is now a good service and how do we do that? I think if all these things settle down and consumers will start to accept it more, I actually am very positive that you will see much more. Yeah, I agree with that.
Any other great examples to add, Anette or Tijmen?
Well, I agree with a lot of that Hessel said. I mean, I'm maybe not the best person to say this is a very good business model and that is a very bad business model, but I recognize what Hessel is saying, and I also want to underline that I mean, yes, we are at the start, right? Like the other speakers are saying, and probably the idea that we would have a very big bang and a completely changed market on 14th September 2019, that is a bit naive, of course. So, and I'm sure as these propositions develop and people get used to them, and there is, I don't know, mouth-to-mouth experience of how things are going, or then there are a lot of interesting things that all people can profit from.
And maybe Annette, do you have an example from Denmark by any chance where maybe Edwin can invest in with his corporate fund?
No, I don't think so. But we do have a lot of companies benefiting from PSD2 in Denmark and in Scandinavia as well. So I think at least some of the ones really benefiting from PSD2 are sort of the aggregators like Tink or Nordic API Gateway and those kind of companies who took this and turned it into a new business opportunity, right? I think that was, and not even sort of the whole idea about PSD2. I don't think anyone had really thought about the aggregators, but I think that is companies that really benefited from the opportunities of PSD2. But I think we will see a lot more down the road.
Thank you.
But I also think that Danske Bank a couple of weeks ago launched a new payment app where no matter where you bank, you can use that app for payments, right? Also completely PSD2 based. Right? So it's there actually see it's also an example of a bank who really now steps into this space.
Makes sense. To wrap up this first subtopic, I've written down a statement, which is the introduction of PSD2 has overall been a success in Europe. Do you guys agree with that? Maybe Edwin, you were already talking, so maybe you can keep talking.
Yeah, then I would ask you, define success. We're not completely there yet, but there are enough people working very hard on it to make it a success. Yeah.
That's a very diplomatic statement. And maybe the regulator, do you have? How do you look at this? Successful so far?
Yeah, I think it has been a success. I mean, and we have been talking for now a lot about the challenges, and they are there. But let's look at the goals of the regulation. First of all, a lot of it had to do, of course, with consumer protection. So, I mean, that is all. At DNB, we went through the structures of all the firms and looked how does the new regulation apply to them, are the checks and balances in place and so on. And I think the body of regulation has meant a lot already on that aspect of the payments markets. Then, of course, we have the new services. It's not so that they didn't exist before. They are regulated and now it adds another layer of protection, I think, especially on the data part of it. The goal of innovation, I already said, we have quite a number of new firms. I think we have a very dynamic landscape as a consequence of PSD2. And yes, the question is where we will end up. Activities that those firms are doing, but there's been a really big shakeup, and I think where we were coming from maybe 3-4 years ago, where also the banks, in all honesty, said, well, this is not the direction that we should go in. Completely changed. So I think it's a success.
Annette?
I think I agree with most of it, and I think it's been a struggle. It's still a struggle, but I think we're sort of getting there. I think there are indeed room for improvements, but yeah, overall, so far, yeah, I think it's been.
Are there any improvements, Hessel? Or has been a big?
Yeah, a bit of the summary. I think all the speakers agree. But it's too early to claim success. But there have been successes. The legislation is in place. The APIs are live. They need improvement, but they are there. The first solutions are visible. So it's early signs of success, and I'm very confident that we'll be successful with PSD2, both as TPPs in the market, banks and regulators alike.
Very optimistic talk. That's good. Hopefully. On to the next topic. The second topic for today is the crypto asset regulation, as well as crypto technology, the crypto technology behind the blockchain technology. I would like to start, Edwin, with you, if that's okay, to see if you can shed some light on especially the technology behind cryptocurrency. So the whole blockchain, like to what extent is it actually used? How important is it? And where do you see this all going from especially from a banking perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's almost a whole panel in itself, but I'll try to keep it short. I think overall, right, when the first signs of blockchain actually became apparent, right, then people were still saying, "Oh, this is sort of the end of the banks," and we actually have seen that it's not the case. But if I then take a step back and I look at the technology itself is extremely interesting. And if I look at what we are doing, we're first of all not doing anything with crypto, right? Because that's not allowed in the Netherlands. But underneath, right, the blockchain, and in terms of how you can tokenize assets and create new digital assets, that's for us super interesting. And this is where we do several experiments. Sometimes we do it by ourselves. Sometimes we do it in conglomerates. We do it also with external parties. We're actually trying to learn how actually it will change and create options for new services, etc. I think though, when I look at the Netherlands specifically compared to our surrounding countries, I see more and more a difference between what is allowed here versus what is allowed in Germany and in for instance in France. So maybe to give you an example about the latter, actually the Banque de France, together with SocGen, launched a digital bond which was completely tokenized. Right, in Germany, there are also experiments where even there are bonds being created without banks. So, what I actually would love to see also that we can do it also here in the Netherlands, because in my mind, it is critical for us as a country, not only for banking perspective but also for startups to be successful. And the second thing is if you also look at what's underneath it, right? Because you have a lot of services like custodian services, etc. Again, we can sort of a bit rebalance. We currently are, for many of those services, very dependent on foreign institutions, not so much outside of the Netherlands. I mean, really outside of Europe. And it would be great. It would be great if there would be a pan-European legislation which would allow the European banks, together with the startup community, to work together and also to create a couple of great startups, ventures, collaborations to really take the benefit of this technology.
One short follow-up. Do you see within the bank already use of blockchain to an extent that it's extremely important? Or is it more like more?
We're still on the level of experiment. But what I do see though is that compared to 2 years ago when I came in function, actually the type of experiments are getting significantly more serious and really more to the core of banking, not only for us but also for many of the other European banks. So you see actually the order of magnitude of what the technology could imply actually is changing. Where I think 2 years ago we were still a bit in a sort of a blockchain winter, you now actually sort of see a revival, especially towards tokenization.
Is there, Anette, I'm very well aware that you're not an expert on this, but is there any general pointers from a legal perspective you like to share? And if not, I move on to Tijmen.
So I think there are, from a legal perspective, two different roads here also, as Edwin talked about. So there is sort of DLT, like, you know, the technical aspects of using the tech as such, and then you have sort of the crypto coin space. And I think on the latter, at least, everyone following this this space would have seen in the press that a proposal for European regulation of digital asset was leaked last week. So I haven't been through almost 200 pages yet, but this is indeed interesting. So the goal is to regulate digital assets in the same way that other financial instruments are regulated. So it divides a sort of digital asset into different categories, some of the stablecoin ones are similar. The characteristics are similar to e-money, and I would assume that the regulation would be sort of in that direction, and others are more like financial instruments. But this is really interesting to follow, and I think both for sort of consumers and also actually the companies dealing in this space, I think it will be sort of welcome to have some legal certainty. Also, if you're a company operating in different countries, because as of now, the regulation, if there are any regulations beside the email requirements, sort of they're different. So I think this will indeed benefit, depending on sort of the content of it, obviously, but I think it will sort of benefit all the players in this space.
Zooming in on cryptocurrency itself, I don't know to what extent this is a specialization for you or not, but I assume that it has been quite an uncomfortable topic for a regulator the last few years, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But could you shed some light on how the regulator now looks into crypto? It's indeed an uncomfortable topic, apparently. But, I don't know if that made Tijmen go away or something else. Because I also wanted to talk with Tijmen about the so-called.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, you did the audio cut out again.
Yes,
I'm really sorry that I cannot give you the video of my face and so on. But
no problem.
Did
you get my question?
No, can you just repeat it in one line?
Oh, that's hard. But I said I'm not sure you are specialized in the area of cryptocurrency, but I assumed that it's been quite a tough cookie, cryptocurrencies, for the regulator last few years, and maybe an uncomfortable topic. But could you shed some light on how the regulator now looks into cryptos, maybe for broader?
Sure. What I want to do is actually give you two perspectives, also hearing the previous speakers. So the first of all is the regulatory side, which you're asking about. I actually heard Edwin say we are not allowed to offer cryptos. That's not entirely true. The main problem with the cryptos is, it's very easy to use them for financial crime, basically, and there is an obligation on financial players to make sure we do not facilitate economic crime. So it's a very difficult, I think, instrument to approach for financial firms from that perspective. We have of course the fifth anti-money laundering directive now, which will create some regulatory atmosphere around cryptos. And there are parties that are offering things like wallets, and there will be a job for us to monitor how this will work from the viewpoint of financial economic crime. One of the more interesting aspects of it is maybe, so why do we have these things? Why is the public interested in it. It's actually more a central bank perspective, I would say, than a regulatory perspective, right? So because we see on the one hand, of course, cash in the economy is in decline, and people are getting more interested in cryptocurrencies. And well, from the central bank perspective, then of course you can start thinking about risks. So I already mentioned financial economic crime, but also does the public really understand what these crypto things are? Who are the issuers behind these currencies? What is the motivation to issue currencies and so on? So coming from that perspective, actually we are quite a big proponent of seeing how we could go about maybe introducing central bank digital currencies. It doesn't exist at the moment, but at DNB we do actually a lot of thinking around this topic. There's actually also position paper.
Sorry to interrupt, but sorry to interrupt. Can you very quickly explain what central bank digital currency actually is for people that don't know?
Sure. So this would be a digital currency issued by the central bank. So in Europe, we are thinking then about ECB or maybe the Dutch central bank. And the idea is that you have a clear alternative for cash. So the functions that cash plays in the economy, so things like store of value, but also the backup function that it has when you have an outage somewhere in the payment system, right? That's also a reason why we think cash is still important in the economy. And some of these things could be taken over by digital currencies. So this is the thinking, and from a lot of aspects, it might make sense given the reluctance of people, to carry cash around, reluctance of some shops to do cash transactions and inefficiencies associated with cash in general. So this is the idea basically, and it is also an area where a lot of our thinking currently is going.
There's risks there for this CBDC, for this central bank currency.
Well, I mean, the current financial system to a large extent is built on the pillars of cash and money that sits digitally on the balance sheets of banks, right? So you really have to think through what it will mean for the financial system, and I think this picture is not entirely clear. It could have all kinds of implications for financial stability, for monetary operations. So I think that we are really at the beginning of understanding that.
So I've killed my own teaser on this topic, and I'm well aware that it's not really crypto. What the central bank is, is at least kind of looking into. If I'm well informed, I think in China they're trying this, they're testing this at quite a grand scale already. But is there anyone else that wants to respond to the idea of central bank digital currency and whether it should be introduced or not? No one?
I definitely. I think from a technology perspective, right, creating something new which is super efficient, further replacing cash, but maybe also lots of the digital payments. I think actually that will be great. I also foresee that the consequences might be very, very big in the way how you implement it, right? From how you do ALM, all these type of things, right? So there are many question marks, but in general, if we can improve our payment system and make it even more stable and also cheaper, probably that's a big plus for me.
Please interrupt me if anyone wants to comment. Otherwise, I'm also here as a moderator to keep track of the time. So, but please do interrupt if you want to add something here. I'll pause for 2 seconds. Because we take giant leaps in this in this session to another topic, which is in itself, as Edwin mentioned before, so certain questions could already fill up easily an hour. But the topic of big tech, and Tijmen, I would like to go back to you to see how the central bank is now looking into big tech. I recently, for the Leaders in Finance podcast, I recently interviewed the former president of the Dutch Central Bank. We also spoke about the word monitoring, which is what the central bank often does, right? Monitoring a certain topic to see if they have to act or not. And I know from my own experience that the central bank is monitoring big tech for a while already. Could you say where you stand on looking into big tech and especially the American big techs, I would say?
Try to be a bit brief with the view on the time, but explain a bit where we are coming from. We know, of course, that quite a few of the big tech firms are in some way active in the financial system, providing all kinds of technical services, and they are also involved in payments solutions. In many cases at the moment that happens through traditional players, right? So your bank can make use of a wallet type facility that you have on your phone, and the big tech sits behind that as a technical service provider or an outsourcing arrangement or whatever way you want to look at. And I suppose one of the questions is, are these big techs going to position themselves as really as players in the payments systems with their own licenses and so on? Almost all of them do have licenses somewhere in Europe. But we do not see them in many cases really offering payments type services directly to consumers at the moment. So the main question is, where is this going, and why are we monitoring? The question, of course, in these types of constellation, do we see new risks emerging? That could go in various directions. For instance, a dependency of all kinds of players in the financial system on a few firms, big tech firms, be it as a service provider or in another sense. And I suppose also when you look at the payment system, the other side of the coin is whether the regulatory framework is ready to deal with really systemic payments institutions, if they would emerge in the sense that, we look at significant institutions in the banking sphere. So I think that's an open question, and the answers to those questions on where things are moving so that is why are we monitoring.
Thank you. We're always talking about big tech having a huge impact on broader society and big groups of people. But Hessel, maybe a question for you is you are an SME yourself. How do you see any competition with these big techs, for example, for your products?
Well, not yet, but they may be the biggest threat in a competitive way. The big techs have access to so much data, and they have deep pockets, so they can, I think, easily enter into any market. So if they decide to pick ours, then I would start to be worried. But the same would go if I was ABN Amro, because some of the big techs are so big that nobody is safe from this force. I think also it is a threat with regards to innovation, because the big techs, they have deep pockets and they can disrupt any market, I think. So it makes it very difficult for new market entrants to enter a market, and that is limiting innovation, I think. So that's also an aspect to look at.
And Anette, I was wondering, do you see any differences on how lawmakers or regulators deal in Europe with looking at big tech and actually taking action?
Well, yeah, I think there are differences. Not that I would have the full view of that, but indeed, for example, I guess it's not big techs, but in Denmark, actually, financial data centers are actually regulated to some extent, and I think that might also be something we will see in Europe. For example, the ECB, in their response to the European Commission's consultation on digital financial services, the ECB addressed sort of the banks going cloud, using big techs to store data, and raised sort of the issue of concentration of risk with those companies and having data outside of Europe. And they also sort of raised the idea of looking into activity-based approach when it comes to regulation, and not so much an entity-based, or at least in addition to the current sort of entity-based regulation. So my guess is at least that big techs in the financial industry will be facing more regulation, but that's just a guess.
Thank you. So Edwin, for you, the last 1 or 2 minutes, if you to respond on this, and especially on the one that Hessel mentioned, he said something like, "I would also be worried if I were a big bank, not only as an a bit smaller player." Is that true? And maybe I can add one other thing to this, which is I see, for example, Deutsche Bank now working together with big tech. So, one, threat, yes or no, and why? And secondly, do you also see, for example, ABN AMRO working with big tech together?
Well, we already, right, with big tech, you have to look at 2 different ways, right? So one is more, let's say, the cloud services, and there we already also work, right, so with big tech. So basically, so we have a lot of our banking applications.
Yeah, well, I meant really into the financial services. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so there we already collaborate a lot. But then also when you're in those clouds, right, there's automatically also AI and other components you will actually then start using in your applications, right? So this is sort of where it is. On the other hand, if you more look to financials, I think where I would see big tech currently be most playing is actually more on the side of disintermediation, for instance, through payments. That's what you already see with Apple Pay. But it might also be, if I talk a little bit more in the field of Hessel, is there's so much data on, for instance, in Amazon that, right, with some banking logic, you could already start underwriting loans by maybe adding a couple of more data points, right? So I also see there on that side definitely a point of disintermediation. Will then the big tech underwrite the loans themselves? Although they have big balance sheets, right, as soon as they start to do that, they will actually get even more regulations on top of the ones they already have. So actually, I would expect that they will still collaborate with banks or other regulated institutions, and that sort of carry the burden there. So that's one side of the story. On the other side is, if I actually also talk with these big techs or with platforms more in general, they also typically have some challenges where actually we as banks can help. Right? So we currently also have a couple of initiatives, and where actually we collaborate with those platforms to develop services, for instance, to support gig workers much better, to create a more secure, from a financial perspective, a more secure environment for them. So also I think there's actually also a lot of new opportunities coming out of these new ecosystems, because although the economy is changing, they will not do everything themselves again, right? So there's also always upside as well, I would say.
With that, we unfortunately need to end this conversation because it's 2 o'clock. I want to thank Anette, Hessel, Edwin, and Tijmen for your time and your interesting insights. I hope the audience has taken something out of this conversation. And do drop either Holland FinTech or myself an email, or ping me on LinkedIn if you have particular questions, because we didn't have time for that. You want to ask the panel, I will forward that. You can directly drop a line to Jeroen, my first name, @leadersinfinance.nl, or again through Holland FinTech, and I will forward them to the panelists. For now, panelists, thank you very much, and I keep definitely following you guys with what you're doing. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.